Lesson 92, Catheudo. As I say here in the lesson, notice the diphthong here in the word catheudo. It's the letter epsilon and upsilon together. Now, a few lessons ago, we had a very important lesson on verb stems and personal endings, okay? We talked about the fact that in Greek, a verb can be divided up into different parts. And the simple way that we're doing it in this book with these present tense verbs is we are dividing it up into the stem and then the personal ending. And so now we're seeing a new verb, which is catheudo. And so we're going to take the stem, which is kappa, alpha, theta, epsilon, upsilon, delta, cathode. We're taking that stem, and then we're going to add the same endings that we added to trecho. It's the same personal endings. They're just attached to a different stem. So for catheudo, in the first person singular, you have the letter omega as your ending. For trecho, in the first person singular, omega was also the ending. So catheudo and trecho, they both have omega at the end because that's first person singular. That's the ending for a first person singular verb. Likewise, in the second person singular, you have epsilon, iota, sigma. That ending is ace. Okay, so here with catheudo, we take our stem, which is cathode, and we add ace to the end, and that gives us catheudes for second person singular. So catheudes says, you sleep. Third person singular, catheude says, he, she, or it sleeps. The personal ending there in the third person singular is epsilon iota. So instead of treche, we have catheude, same ending. In the first person plural, omen is the ending. That's omicron, mu, epsilon, nu. So for trecho, the first person plural form was trechomen. Here we have a different stem. We have cathode as our stem. So we add omen to the stem cathode, and we get cathodomen, which means we sleep or we are sleeping. For second person plural, the ending is epsilon, tau, epsilon, eta. So here we're adding that ending to cathode, which is the stem of the verb, and that gives us cathodete, which means y'all sleep or y'all are sleeping. With trecho, it was trechete, which means y'all run or y'all are running. So the ending is the same. For both of those second person plural verbs, it's epsilon, tau, epsilon. In the third person plural, again, the stem is cathode, and we add usi or usin as the ending. And so we get cathodusi or cathodusin. For the verb trecho, it was trechusi or trechusin. Of course, the stem was different, but it was the same ending attached to the stem. So in this particular lesson, what we would like to point out not only is the fact that there's a new verb to know about, which is catheudo, but we also want to reiterate the concept of stem plus ending. That's a really important pattern for you to learn about as a beginning student of ancient Greek. Okay, we're taking the same personal endings that we had with the verb trecho, but we're just attaching those endings to a new stem. So as you go along, it would behoove you to memorize those endings to get to the point where you really know those endings well and can attach them to a verb stem whenever you want. And when you see them in print, you can recognize them and know what they're saying. So you can chant these verbs. You can walk along and say catheudo, cathodes, cathode, cathodomen, cathodete, cathodusin. You can just repeat them to yourself over and over to help yourself memorize them. But also you can memorize just the endings. You can say, o, ace, a, omen, eta, usi, or usin. You can do this in writing. You can write the verbs out. You can do it verbally. You can write out just the endings, or you can just chant the endings verbally. There are several ways to practice this. But the basic point here is that you're going to be learning more and more verbs. And so you want to be able to discern what part of the verb is the stem and what is the personal ending. So you want to get familiar with the stems and the endings. And when you do that, this whole business becomes easier because the endings are just the same for every verb. You're just sticking those same personal endings onto a new stem for each verb. So instead of learning 6 new things when you have a new verb, it's really like you're just learning one new thing, just the stem, and then you're just attaching the same old endings that you already knew and that you already attached to the other verbs. So this concept is important for you as a student, the idea that there's a stem and then endings that you attach to the stem. And as I say here in the lesson, from now on, when we have a new verb to learn, we're just going to give you all 6 present tense forms all at once. When you were learning the endings for the first time, it was probably helpful to take it slow and learn each individual verb form one at a time. But now we don't need to do that because you already know the verb endings. That is, the personal endings. So now we can move a little bit faster and just give you all 6 forms all at once because, again, we're just reusing those same personal endings as before. And again, as I mentioned before, as a technical note, we call these endings personal endings, but technically speaking, they do include something called a thematic vowel. For those of you who are more interested in the details of Greek grammar, technically speaking, the endings that we're giving you here are the thematic vowel and the personal ending together. But just for the sake of simplicity, for beginners, we just call them personal endings, even though really there's a little bit more than that in there. Okay, so let's take a look at a few exercises. And as you do, keep your eyes peeled for those personal endings because the endings will tell you who is doing the action. In number 1, the verb here is katheudusin. Notice the personal ending is usin. That's third person plural. And so who is doing the sleeping? Okay, that's the verb katheudo, but it's got the usin ending. And so it's they doing the action. So katheudusin says they sleep or they are sleeping. The subject is hoi ailuroi, which means the cats. And so the core of this sentence is the cats are sleeping. And then we have an adverb here. We have polakis, which means often. So add it all together and you get the cats often are sleeping. But it would sound nicer and smoother in English to say the cats sleep often. With the adverb polakis, here it just sounds nicer in English to use the simple present. And so the cats sleep often. In number 2, we also have the third person plural, katheudusin. Notice again that we have the usin ending for the verb. That's third person plural. In number 3, we have omen as the personal ending of the verb. Okay, so if you've studied your endings, you know that that's first person plural, and so it's we doing the action. The stem of the verb is katheud, which means sleep, and the personal ending is omen. So katheudomen says we sleep or we are sleeping. It's being negated by the word u, which means not. So number 3, as a whole, would say something like either we do not sleep or we are not sleeping. Probably we are not sleeping is the best sounding translation in English. Let's look at one more. In number 4, we have katheude as the verb. The stem of the verb is katheud, and the personal ending is epsilon and iota. That's the A ending, which is third person singular. So katheude says he, she, or it sleeps, or he, she, or it is sleeping. But we don't need the pronoun included in katheude because we have a separate word to be the subject. We have Alexandros. So we have Alexander, and he is sleeping. And then we have the adverb polakis, which means often. So number 4 says, Alexander sleeps often.